Chapter 1. The daughter of the enemy, from the northern cliffs to the southern plains. The banners of two houses, Ashbourne and Thorn, fluttered like wounded birds against the wind. Every child born into that age learned to whisper their prayers beneath the echo of marching boots. Every dawn began with smoke rising from someone's home. Lady Evelina Ashbourne had stopped believing in peace long ago. She stood upon the crumbling balcony of her father's once grand estate, the manor of Blackmere, gazing at a sky bruised purple with the promise of another storm. Below, soldiers were loading wagons with the last of their grain. Beyond them, the hills rolled toward the horizon, where the enemy's banners, black and crimson, would soon appear. Her father's voice boomed from the hall behind her. "You'll ride for safety before dusk, Evelina. The Thorn hounds are already across the border." She turned slowly, her gown of muted blue catching the grey light. "And leave you here to die, father?" she asked quietly. "I would sooner burn with this house." Lord Cedric Ashbourne, once one of the king's favoured advisers, now looked more ghost than man, gaunt, sleepless and bitter. His downfall had begun when he was accused of betraying the crown to foreign allies. The accusation had cost him lands, reputation, and his wife's life. But the war he started to reclaim his honour had cost thousands more. "You'll go," Cedric snapped, slamming a fist against the table. "The Thorns will show no mercy. Not to me, not to my blood." Evelina flinched at the word blood. It had always been her curse. The blood of a traitor, they called it. But she had not chosen her father's sins. That night, the wind howled across the moors like a living thing. The manor's candles burned low, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone corridors. Evelina packed a small satchel, nothing of gold or silk, only a worn book of poems, a locket containing her mother's portrait, and a dagger with her family crest. As she wrapped herself in a dark cloak, she hesitated by the door. Something deep inside her whispered that she would not see this place again. Outside, her mare stamped impatiently in the mud. "Easy, Astra," she murmured, stroking the animal's neck. Then came the sound, faint at first, like thunder rolling from the hills. But it was not thunder. It was the iron rhythm of hooves, and with it the world she knew ended. Flames erupted in the distance. The Thorn army had come sooner than anyone expected. The horizon glowed red, and the cries of men echoed through the mist. Evelina spurred her horse toward the forest, heart pounding. She didn't look back. Not until a deafening crack split the air. The manor was burning. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like something broken. But before she could turn back, riders burst from the trees, cloaked in black, swords gleaming with wet steel. "Lady Ashbourne," a voice called, "by order of Commander Rowan Thorn, you are seized." Evelina pulled her dagger, though her hands shook. "I'll die before I kneel to him." The lead soldier's eyes softened for only a moment. "You might not have a choice." The blow came swift, the hilt of a sword to her temple, and the world went dark. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, the clatter of wheels, the sting of cold metal against her wrists, and the muffled roar of men outside. She was inside a prison wagon, chained and bound, her head throbbing. Through the wooden slats, she glimpsed the Thorn encampment, rows of tents, fires glowing like amber stars in the valley, the air heavy with rain and iron. "Bring her to the commander," someone barked. Her heart stuttered. So it was true. She would face the man whose name haunted every Ashbourne child's nightmares. Commander Rowan Thorne, the Wolf of Eldervale, the man whose brother had been killed by her father's betrayal, the man who had vowed never to rest until the house of Ashbourne was erased. The soldiers hauled her out, mud splattering her gown. The camp fell silent as she was dragged toward the largest tent at its center. Inside, the air smelled of parchment, steel, and storm. Maps were spread across a heavy oak table, weighed down by daggers, and there, standing beside them, was Rowan Thorne. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark uniform that bore the silver sigil of his house, a wolf entwined with a sword. His hair, dark as the storm outside, fell just past his jaw. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Grey as weathered steel, cold and unreadable. He didn't look up immediately. "You've brought her," he said, his voice low, roughened by years of command. "Leave us." The soldiers obeyed. When they were gone, silence filled the tent, sharp, alive. Only then did Rowan lift his gaze. "So," he said quietly, "the daughter of Lord Cedric Ashbourne." Evelina lifted her chin despite the fear twisting in her chest. "If you mean to kill me, do it quickly. I've no patience for cruelty." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Quickly?" He stepped closer, each stride deliberate. "You think death is a kindness I'd offer to your father's bloodline? You've already burned my home. What more could you want?" "Answers," he said darkly, "and perhaps retribution." He circled her like a wolf sizing up prey. "Do you even know the lives your father took? My brother's throat was slit in his sleep under a flag of truce. The same night your father dined with the king." Her breath caught. "I didn't know." "Didn't know?" Rowan's eyes flashed. "You carry his crest, his name, his arrogance, and you expect me to believe you knew nothing?" "I was 17, she said, voice trembling but steady. "I was sent away from court long before the war began. I am guilty of nothing but my father's sins." For a heartbeat, something flickered in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or pity. Then it vanished. "Guilt is inherited, Lady Evelina. So is blood." He turned away, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles whitened. She noticed the scar running along his wrist. An old wound, deep and jagged. He spoke again, voice quieter now. "If you expect mercy, you'll find none here." "Then why am I alive?" she whispered. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw conflict in his eyes. "Because I wanted to see what kind of woman he raised." The storm broke that night. Rain drummed on the tents, washing the camp in silver light. Rowan stood outside beneath it, his cloak soaked, eyes fixed on the fire-lit horizon where Blackmere Manor still smoldered. Inside his tent, Evelina sat by the cold brazier, hands bound, staring at the man she'd come to hate and fear, and something else she didn't yet understand. He had spared her life when he had no reason to. He had looked at her, not as a prisoner, but as something he couldn't quite name. That thought frightened her more than his threats. Outside, Rowan whispered to the rain, "You're my enemy's daughter, and the only woman I can't forget." Chapter 2. A Prison of Shadows. The fortress of Highcourt Keep loomed like a dark crown upon the cliffs. Once a royal stronghold, it now served as the beating heart of Rowan Thorne's army. a fortress carved from black stone, where mercy was a foreign tongue, and every shadow whispered of war. When Evelina first opened her eyes there, she thought she had woken in a tomb. Her chamber was cold and austere, stone walls, a single narrow window, and a heavy oak door banded with iron. A tray of untouched food sat beside her, still warm. Her wrists were unshackled, though the marks remained, red against her pale skin. Outside the window, she could hear the sea battering the cliffs far below, its roar endless and wild. For a long time she sat motionless, staring at the sea. The memory of fire still haunted her. The manor burning, her father's face disappearing into smoke, and the cold eyes of the man who had spared her for reasons she could not grasp. Then the door creaked open. A soldier entered, a broad man in thorn colors, his beard flecked with grey. "Commander Thorn requests your presence," he said curtly. Evelina rose, smoothing the wrinkles in her tattered gown. "And if I refuse?" The man met her gaze without flinching. "Then I'll carry you." She swallowed her fear and followed. The corridors of High Court were dim and echoing, lit by torches that spat orange light against stone. Soldiers turned to stare as she passed, some with curiosity, others with open disdain. Ashbourne was a cursed name in these halls. She could feel it, heavy as the chain she no longer wore. At last they reached a tall set of doors. The guard knocked once and entered, motioning her inside. Rowan stood at a long table strewn with maps and reports. His armor was gone now. He wore a simple black tunic, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the scars that crossed his forearms. A faint bruise marked his jaw, the sign of some recent skirmish. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "You're awake," he said. "Good." Evelina crossed her arms. "Should I thank you for the privilege?" "You should thank me for being alive at all," he replied evenly. "Most prisoners of war don't see a bed." "Then why am I different?" He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because you are leverage. Your father's forces are retreating toward the southern passes. With you here, he'll think twice before marching again." Her stomach turned. "So I'm to be used as a pawn?" "You were born one," he said coldly. "You just didn't know it." His words struck harder than she expected. She turned away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Through the window, she could see the sea again, endless and merciless. "You hate him so much," she whispered, "that you would make me suffer for his crimes." "Your father murdered my blood," Rowan said quietly. "He sent men with smiles and daggers to our table. My brother bled out before dawn. You ask why I hate him? Because I buried a child who never saw his 20th year." Evelina turned back to him, her voice breaking. "And I buried a mother who couldn't live with what he'd done. Do you think I don't hate him too?" The words hung between them, raw, unguarded, impossible to take back. Rowan's eyes darkened, not with anger this time, but something else, something dangerously human. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You hate your father. I despise what he became," she said, "but he's still my blood." "Blood," Rowan murmured, "a curse neither of us can wash clean." For a heartbeat, they stood close enough for her to feel the heat from his skin. Then he stepped back abruptly, as though burned by the thought. "You'll remain here," he said, his tone hard again. "You'll be treated as a noble prisoner. Food, water, a roof. But understand this, Lady Evelina, every soldier here has lost someone to your father's wars, Stay out of their way. She lifted her chin. And if I don't, then I won't protect you. Evelina's chamber overlooked the courtyard, where soldiers trained from dawn until the stars rose. She would watch them in silence, the rhythm of steel against steel, the shouted orders, the sound of Rowan's voice cutting through the air like thunder. He commanded not with cruelty but precision. His men obeyed him not out of fear but reverence. Sometimes she saw him sparring, the arc of his sword fluid, his movements almost beautiful in their lethality, and sometimes when he caught her watching, his gaze would flick upward, locking with hers for a single, charged heartbeat before he turned away. The fortress had become her cage, and yet, against her will, she began to feel its rhythm. One morning, a knock startled her from sleep. When she opened the door, she found a young maid, timid, barely 16, holding a tray of bread and broth. "The commander said you were to have this," the girl stammered. He doesn't like when prisoners starve." Evelina smiled faintly. "What's your name?" "Tessa, my lady." "Tessa, tell me, does your commander often keep prisoners alive out of mercy?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "He doesn't keep anyone alive, my lady, only you." That night, unable to sleep, Evelina crept to the window. The moonlight fell across the courtyard, silvering the stones. Below, she saw Rowan again, standing alone near the wall, his cloak stirring in the wind. He was staring toward the horizon, where the enemy lines smoldered faintly in the distance. Something compelled her to move. Quietly, she slipped from her chamber and followed the echo of the waves until she reached the outer parapet. Rowan didn't turn as she approached. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. "Old habits. A commander sleeps lightly." "And dreams?" she asked softly. "Not anymore." They stood in silence, the sea crashing below them. The wind carried the scent of rain and salt. For the first time, Evelina saw not the soldier, but the man beneath the armor, weary, scarred, and bound by ghosts as heavy as her own. "Why did you spare me?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "I told you, your leverage." "That's not true," she said. "You could have sent my head to my father if that was all you wanted." His jaw tightened. "Careful, Lady Evelina." "No," she pressed, stepping closer. "You look at me as if you hate me, but your eyes say something else. What is it you're so afraid to admit?" He turned to her then, so suddenly that her breath caught. "I'm afraid of nothing," he growled, but the lie trembled in his voice, and when she looked up into his eyes, she saw it, the same torment that had followed her since that night of fire. "You're afraid of remembering," she whispered. Rowan's gaze burned into hers. "Remembering what? That before the war, we were all just people, not monsters, not names to destroy." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Rowan took a single step forward, close enough that the space between them vanished into breath and heartbeat. "You think words can undo what's been done?" he said quietly. "You think you can speak away blood?" "No," Evelina said, "but maybe you could stop spilling it." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then, without another word, Rowan turned and walked away, his cloak snapping in the wind. Evelina stood alone on the parapet, the night pressing close around her. She told herself she hated him, that she would always hate him, but even as she whispered it, her heart betrayed her with its wild, traitorous rhythm. In the days that followed, something shifted. Rowan began visiting her chamber, at first with questions, then with conversation. They spoke of the war, of what had been lost, of the kingdom before it all fell to ruin. His anger did not vanish, but it softened, worn down by the strange understanding that grew between them. And one evening, when the storm outside lashed against the fortress walls, he asked a question that changed everything. If you could go anywhere, Lady Evelina, anywhere beyond this war, where would it be? She smiled faintly. Somewhere the sea is quiet, somewhere no one knows the name Ashbourne or Thorn. A place without enemies, he murmured. Do such places exist? He didn't answer. Instead, he poured her a glass of wine, a rare kindness, and lifted his own. Then we'll invent one, he said softly, if only for tonight. Their cups touched. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm howled. But inside that flickering light, something unspoken began to bloom. Neither of them named it, neither of them dared, but both of them felt it. The dangerous, fragile beginning of something neither sword nor oath could undo. Chapter 3. Whispers beneath the storm. Rain had fallen for 3 days without pause. High Court Keep seemed to drown beneath it. The courtyard a sea of mud. The air thick with damp and thunder. Soldiers moved like shadows between tents. Cloaks drawn tight, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Inside, candles flickered weakly in the draughts that slithered through stone halls. The war had gone quiet, too quiet, Rowan said, and silence was never peace. It was the hush before the strike. Evelina felt it too, a restlessness coiling in her chest. She had grown used to her confinement, the routine of her days, the narrow walks along the battlements, the distant sound of steel in the yard, the sight of Rowan's figure passing below. He spoke to her less now, but when he did, it was with a strange gentleness, a voice she had begun to crave against her will, and yet even as warmth flickered between them, danger gathered unseen. That evening she sat by her window, writing in the margins of her mother's old book of poems. She had found the courage to write again, though most lines ended unfinished. Fragments of thoughts she could not bear to complete. She was startled when a soft knock came at her door. "Tessa," Evelina called. The door creaked open. The maid slipped in, clutching a folded letter, her face pale beneath her cap. "Forgive me, my lady," Tessa whispered, glancing nervously toward the hall. "A messenger came at dawn. He left this for you?" Evelina frowned. "For me? From whom?" "He didn't say, but he wore no thorn colors." Evelina's heart quickened. She took the parchment and unsealed it with trembling hands. The wax bore her family's crest, the silver hawk of Ashbourne, her father's seal. She read the words in silence, the world tilting with each line. "Evelina, my scouts tell me you live. A miracle in this pitiless war. You are held at High Court by Rowan Thorn, that viper who destroyed our house. You must do your duty now. Within a week's time we strike. When you see the signal fire upon the cliffs, open the western gate. The enemy will die unawares. Do this, and your father's name shall be redeemed. Refuse, and you are no daughter of mine." There was no signature, only the sigil pressed deep into the wax. Evelina's vision blurred. She crushed the letter in her hands, as if she could destroy its meaning with sheer force. "Are you all right, my lady?" Tessa asked, alarmed. "Leave me," Evelina said faintly. "Please." The maid hesitated, then curtsied and fled. When she was gone, Evelina pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. The words burned behind her eyes. "Open the gate. kill them unawares. Her father meant to ambush the fortress, to slaughter Rowan's men while they slept. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could end the war with a single act, but she would also end him. That night, Rowan summoned her. The guards escorted her to his study, a room she had come to know well. Maps spread across the desk, a half-empty decanter of wine, the soft crackle of firelight reflecting in his grey eyes. He looked weary. The rain had left his hair damp, his collar open, and the lines at the corners of his mouth deeper than usual. "You received a letter today," he said without preamble. Evelina froze. You opened it?" "No." His gaze held hers. "But my men saw the crest. Your father's seal is not one easily missed." "Then you know what it said?" "I didn't read it," he said slowly. "I wanted to hear it from you." Evelina's breath hitched. She could lie. She should lie. But the weight of his trust, fragile as glass, pressed down on her chest. "He wants to attack you," she said finally, voice trembling. "He plans to storm the fortress in a week. He asked me to open the western gate." Rowan's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on the edge of the table until the wood creaked. "And will you?" he asked quietly. "You think I would?" Her voice rose, raw with hurt. "After everything, you are his daughter, and you are his enemy," she snapped. "Yet you spared me, you feed me, you speak to me like I'm human, when you could have thrown me in a dungeon. Do you think I'd repay that with treachery?" A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Rowan exhaled, his shoulders easing. "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted. He stepped closer, so close that she could see the flicker of firelight in his eyes. "I've lived half my life on vengeance, Evelina. Every battle, every drop of blood, it was all for a cause that feels hollow now. And then you came, the one person I should despise most, and I can't decide whether you're my ruin or my salvation." Her breath caught. "Rowan, don't," he said roughly, as if even her voice could break him. "Don't say my name like that." But she couldn't stop. "You're not the man he says you are, and I'm not the monster you think I am." He closed his eyes briefly, struggling for control. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Then what are we? Lost," she whispered. "Both of us." He looked at her for a long time, and in that silence, something shifted again, something irreversible. When he finally turned away, his voice was all command once more. "You'll stay confined to your chamber until the attack is over. If you're telling the truth, then you've saved every life in this fortress." "And if I'm lying?" she asked softly. He met her gaze. "Then you've condemned your father." The next days were a blur of tension. The fortress braced for war, soldiers reforging weapons, scouts vanishing into the mist, banners withdrawn from the ramparts. The storm outside never ceased, thunder rolling across the sea like cannon fire. Evelina kept to her room, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face. Proud, ruthless, unbending, and Rowan's eyes, the grey of a winter sea, caught between fury and forgiveness. She was still staring into the dark when the door burst open one night. It was Tessa again, pale with fear. "My lady, the western watchtower, it burns." Evelina froze. The signal fire. Her father had come. The fortress erupted in chaos. Bells clanged. Orders shouted through the rain. The gate drums thundered as soldiers rushed to their stations. Evelina ran to the window. Torches blazed on the horizon. The forest alive with enemy banners. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She tore her cloak from the wall and ran into the storm. Outside, the rain lashed like whips against her face. Mud clung to her skirts, and the roar of the sea drowned all thought. She forced her way through the courtyard until she saw him, Rowan, mounted, sword drawn, his men forming ranks around him. He saw her through the rain, disbelief flashing across his face. "Evelina, get back inside. You'll die if you fight them head on," she shouted over the wind. "He's luring you out. You think I'll hide while they storm my walls? Then let me help," she cried. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Rain, thunder, time itself. Then Rowan reached down, seized her wrist, and pulled her up behind him onto his horse. "If you ever betray me," he said fiercely, "I'll know it was worth dying for." The gates burst open, and they rode into the storm, the enemy's torches burning through the night, steel clashing, thunder answering from the heavens, and somewhere amidst the chaos, as lightning split the sky above them, Evelina realized the truth she had feared from the start. She could no longer tell where her heart's loyalty lay, with the father who gave her life, or the enemy who had taught her what it meant to feel alive. Chapter 4, Fire and Oath. The storm came with no warning. By dusk, the horizon was black with thunderclouds, and the air was thick with the scent of iron and rain. The fortress on the cliffs of thorns stood like a dark sentinel against the tempest, unaware or unwilling to believe that its doom was riding with the wind. Inside the command tower, Rowan Thorne leaned over a map lit by flickering lamplight. Every line and inked mark spoke of war, of a siege that had dragged on for months, of a kingdom slowly bleeding itself dry. His soldiers waited for orders that never seemed to end, and his heart, iron-walled, unyielding, had begun to falter for the first time in years. Because of her, Evelina Ashbourne stood across the table, her hair damp with rain, her eyes unflinching despite the exhaustion shadowing her face. The silence between them was charged. Too many unspoken words, too many nights of half-truths and glances that burned more than flame. "You shouldn't be here," Rowan said, voice low. "If they see you in my war room—" "They already talk," Evelina interrupted softly. "Whether I speak to you or not makes little difference." He looked up sharply, anger masking what he refused to name. "You think I care about gossip?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "But you care about loyalty, and if I don't warn you, you'll be dead before sunrise." Her words sliced through the air. "What do you mean?" Rowan demanded. "My father," she said, each syllable a confession. "He's found a way in. The miners tunneled beneath the western cliff. The wall will fall tonight." Rowan froze. "How do you know this?" "Because I intercepted the letter meant for his spies." She reached into her cloak and placed a crumpled parchment on the table. The wax seal, the silver hawk of Ashbourne, was half melted but unmistakable. "He means to end this war in one night, and you, Commander, are his first target." The sound of the wind outside rose to a shriek. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Rowan's voice dropped to a growl. "You should have brought this to me sooner." "I couldn't," Evelina whispered. "Your men already suspect me. They call me the enemy's daughter when they think I can't hear." "And what am I to call you?" he asked bitterly. "Savior or spy?" Evelina's jaw trembled. "Whichever you believe I deserve." He turned away, fists tightening on the map's edges. The storm thundered against the windows. Finally he said, "If you're lying to me, Evelina, I'll hang you myself. Then you'll have to "Look me in the eyes while you do it," she said quietly. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the storm raging beyond the glass. Then Rowan tore his gaze from hers and barked for his men. "Sound the alarm! Double the guards at the western wall!" The horn's mournful cry echoed across the fortress, but even that warning came too late. The explosion shattered the night. A roar split the heavens as fire burst from the cliffs. Stone rained down like hail. Towers crumbled. Men screamed. The western wall, once thought impregnable, collapsed into a blazing ruin. Through the smoke, the banners of Ashbourne surged forward like a tide of ghosts. Evelina stumbled from the war room as Rowan seized his sword. The air was thick with smoke and terror. The fortress, her prison, her refuge, her battlefield, was dying around her. She ran through the corridors, shouting for the servants to flee, for the wounded to take shelter. Every step felt heavier, every breath scorched by the scent of burning pitch. Then she saw him, Rowan, emerging through the fire and chaos, his armor blackened, his blade red with the blood of her father's men. Their eyes met across the courtyard. "You shouldn't be here," he shouted over the roar. "Get to the keep." "I won't leave you. This isn't your fight. It became mine the moment I warned you," she cried. A second blast shook the earth, sending them both sprawling. The gate collapsed behind them, and in the chaos, the captain of Rowan's guard, Darius, appeared with soldiers in tow, dragging a bound man and a parchment in his fist. "Commander," Darius shouted, "we found this in the lady's chamber, a message sealed with Ashbourne's crest." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Show me." Evelina's blood went cold. "No, Rowan, listen to me." Darius thrust the letter forward. "Your pretty guest was passing our plans straight to her father. The tunnels, the guard rotations, everything. We've been betrayed." "That's not true," Evelina cried, stepping forward. "I never—" "Enough!" Darius roared, drawing his sword. "You've done enough damage, witch." Rowan grabbed the letter, tearing it open. The words were smudged, but the script, her father's, was clear. The message spoke of troop numbers and weapon stores. It was damning, undeniable. The commander's face hardened, the firelight dancing across his blade. "Evelina, what is this?" She stared at the letter, realization breaking through her like lightning. "It's a forgery. He knew I'd come here. He planned this." Darius sneered. "A likely tale. Kill her now, before she brings the rest of the fortress down." He lunged, but Rowan's sword intercepted his. "Stand down," the commander barked. "She's an Ashbourne. They killed your family, Rowan." "I said stand down." The men hesitated, torn between fear and fury. Rowan turned to Evelina, his voice rough, ragged. "Tell me the truth, one last time." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice didn't tremble. "I tried to save you. That's all I've ever done." The moment hung suspended between them. Love, betrayal, war, all in one fragile heartbeat. Then Rowan lowered his sword. "Put her in the cells. No one touches her without my word." They dragged her through the corridors as the fortress burned, down the spiraling steps, through the smoke and screams until they reached the dungeons below. The iron door clanged shut behind her, sealing her away from the world above. For hours or days, she couldn't tell, she sat in the dark, the distant sounds of battle echoing like memories. The stone was cold beneath her fingers. Her heart refused to be. Then came the footsteps. He appeared like a shadow at the edge of the torchlight, armor battered, face streaked with soot, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Rowan Thorn. He unlocked the cell but didn't step inside. For a long while, he simply stood there, looking at her, as though trying to remember what it was to feel anything but rage. "The fortress is lost," he said at last. "My men are retreating to the eastern ridge." "Then go with them," she whispered. "Save what you can." "And leave you to face what comes?" She lifted her chin, though her voice broke. "There's no saving me, Rowan. Not in your soldiers' eyes. Not in your king's." "Do you think I care what they see?" he snapped. "You should. You're the last man in this kingdom who still has something to lose." He stared at her, jaw tight, and for a moment the firelight softened the edges of his face. "Why didn't you run when you had the chance?" "Because I knew you wouldn't." A single laugh, low, broken, escaped him. He stepped closer until he stood before the bars. "I swore I'd never forgive an Ashbourne," he said, voice rough. "And yet, when I saw you fall from your horse that first night, when I thought you'd die, I couldn't breathe." Evelina swallowed hard. "Then breathe now. Let me go. If I do, they'll call me a traitor. Then we'll be traitors together." He closed his eyes, exhaling as though it cost him everything. When he opened them again, something inside him had shattered. He unlocked the cell and reached out a trembling hand. "Come with me." She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Together they fled through the burning fortress, through corridors that collapsed behind them, past soldiers shouting, through the last open gate that led toward the cliffs. Rain poured in sheets, extinguishing the flames and mixing blood with mud beneath their boots. At the edge of the cliffs, they stopped. The sea raged below, furious and endless. The horizon glowed with fire from the ruins of the fortress. Rowan turned to her, his expression torn between grief and defiance. "There's no turning back from this, Evelina." "I never wanted to," she whispered. He leaned in, their foreheads touching, breath mingling in the storm. "You're my enemy's daughter," he murmured, voice shaking, "and the only woman I can't forget." Her lips brushed his, a fleeting promise in the ashes of war. Then a horn blared from the ridge. Ashbourne's men had found them. Rowan gripped her shoulders. "Go! They'll kill you if they find you with me. And what of you? I'll hold them long enough for you to escape." "Rowan." He kissed her once, hard, desperate, and then pushed her toward the shadows of the cliffside forest. "Go, Evelina." Tears blurred her vision as she turned and ran, the wind howling in her ears. Behind her, she heard the clash of swords, the shouts of soldiers, the sound of one man defying an army. When dawn broke, the fortress of Thorn was no more, just smoke rising over the cliffs and a single banner torn and burning in the sea breeze. And somewhere beneath the weeping sky, Evelina swore that fire had not taken him, that her heart, bound by oath and love alike, would find him again. Chapter 5. The Weight of Blood. The fortress of Thorn burned for 3 days before the rains came to smother it. What remained was little more than blackened stone and the bones of men who had once sworn loyalty to a cause that now existed only in the memories of survivors. When the armies of Ashbourne finally withdrew, they left behind a wasteland of mud and ghosts. And somewhere among those ghosts Lady Evelina Ashbourne walked alone. The road to her father's estate wound through valleys that had once been golden with wheat and song. Now they lay scarred and barren, the soil blackened by fire. Crows circled above the remains of farmhouses, their cries thin and mournful. Evelina rode a borrowed horse, its ribs showing beneath a tattered saddlecloth. Her cloak was torn, her hands were raw from the rains. She had escaped the fall of thorn only by the mercy of the storm and by Rowan's last command. "Go, Evelina," the words still rang in her ears, sharper than the memory of his kiss. She had run, as he'd told her to. She had fled the flames, the soldiers, the end, but she had not left him behind. Every mile since then had been a wound reopened, every breath a prayer she could not speak. When she reached Ashbourne Manor, she almost didn't recognize it. The grand estate that had once ruled half the kingdom now crouched beneath the shadow of its own decay. The gates hung open, twisted by siege and time. The once lush gardens were nothing but weeds. Windows gaped like hollow eyes. Inside, silence ruled. Dust lay thick on the marble floors, and the banners of her house were faded, torn by wind and neglect. Her father's great hall, the same place he had once held councils of war, was empty but for a single man. Lord Cedric Ashbourne sat upon his throne, wrapped in furs despite the warm air. His hair had turned to ash, his face to parchment. The proud general of a decade past was gone. Only the wreck of ambition remained. Evelina hesitated at the door. "Father," his head lifted slowly, as if the name were foreign to him. His eyes, once sharp as blades, were clouded now, though something like recognition flickered there. "So," he rasped, "the prodigal returns." "I came because I heard the war was over," he laughed, a sound dry and brittle as paper. "Over? No, my child. Wars never end. They just change who carries the sword." Evelina stepped closer. "You lost everything, father. The men, the lands, the crown's favor. I lost nothing that mattered," he cut in, voice rising. "Do you think I fought for gold? For titles? I fought to break Thorn, to make him feel what I felt when his father slaughtered your mother in that cursed siege." She stopped, her breath catching. "Mother, you told me she died of fever." He looked at her then, truly looked, and she saw the madness that had taken root. "You were a child. What did you know of the world's cruelty? The thorns burned her alive in her carriage. I found what was left myself." Evelina's heart lurched. "That's not true," she whispered. "Rowan's father died before." "Silence!" Cedric roared, slamming a trembling fist against the armrest. "You dare defend them after what they've done? After what you've done?" she cried. "You turned this land to ash. You sent men to die for vengeance, not justice. He rose suddenly, staggering toward her. "You betrayed me," he hissed. "I saw your letter, the one you sent from Thorn. My spies brought it to me before the fortress fell." "I never wrote any letter," Evelina said, voice shaking. "You forged it. You wanted them to find it." He smiled then, a terrible, hollow smile. "And they did." She stepped back, horror dawning. "You wanted me condemned. You were already lost," Cedric said. "You looked at the son of my enemy as though he were your salvation. I could not allow it." Evelina's vision blurred with tears. "You damned me for loving him. I saved you from disgrace." "No," she said, trembling. "You saved yourself. from the shame of being wrong. The silence that followed was suffocating. The once mighty Lord of Ashbourne stood trembling before his daughter, undone by the truth he had buried beneath years of hatred. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. "You sound like your mother." Evelina turned away. "Then perhaps I've finally become her daughter." That night, she could not sleep. The manor groaned under the weight of wind and memory. She walked the empty halls, passing the portraits of ancestors who glared down with painted judgment. At last, she found herself in her mother's chamber, sealed for years under her father's command. The room was untouched. The scent of lavender lingered faintly in the dust. On the dressing table lay a silver locket. Evelina opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a tiny sketch, a woman with dark eyes and a soft smile, holding a babe, and beside her, not the face of her father, but another man, a man she recognized instantly. Rowan's father, the old Duke Thorn. Her knees gave way. The truth struck like thunder. Her mother had not been killed by the Thorns. She had loved one. The war between their houses, the endless blood and ruin, had begun not from murder, but from betrayal and jealousy. Her father's rage had been born not of justice, but heartbreak. Far across the border, in the capital of Edrian, Rowan Thorn stood before the king. The great hall shimmered with banners of gold and crimson, celebrating victory. Courtiers applauded as Rowan knelt, the scars of war still fresh upon him. He felt none of it. "Arise, Sir Rowan Thorn," the king proclaimed. "Hero of the realm, the crown owes you its peace." Peace. The word was an echo in a hollow chest. When Rowan stood, applause thundered around him. The nobles smiled, toasting his name. Yet when he looked into the mirror of their polished armor and jeweled eyes, all he saw was the fortress burning, her face in the firelight, her voice in the storm. "You're my enemy's daughter, and the only woman I can't forget." He left the ceremony before the feast began. For weeks he wandered the edges of his estate, where the hills rolled down to the sea. The wind whispered through the heather, and the gulls cried over the cliffs. The world had returned to peace, but his soul had not. Then one morning, a messenger came. The seal on the letter was Ashbourne's. Rowan broke it with shaking hands. "Commander Thorn, if you still live, then you deserve the truth that was denied to both of us. The war between our houses was born not from murder, but from love. My mother and your father were lovers before my father took her by force and bound her to his name. When she tried to flee to the Thorns, he stopped her and blamed your family for her death. I carry her locket now. It bears your father's likeness beside hers. I think you should see it. If you still hate me, burn this letter. But if there is anything left of the man who let me live, come to the ruins of Ashbourne before the next full moon." Evelina Rowan read it twice, unable to breathe. The rain outside blurred the ink where his thumb rested. At last, he whispered, "Evelina." Evelina stood among the ruins of her father's hall. Lord Cedric lay upstairs, too weak to rise, fading into the silence of his own madness. The war had taken everything from him: lands, soldiers, pride. Soon it would take his breath as well. She held the locket in her palm, its silver cool against her skin, and waited. The moon rose over the shattered windows, pale and watchful, and then footsteps. He appeared in the doorway like a shadow remembered. Rowan, no armor, no crown's cloak, only a man, weary and worn, the sea wind in his dark hair. Neither spoke at first. The night filled the silence between them, the sigh of wind through the ruins, the whisper of ash falling from broken beams. Then Rowan took a step forward. "You're alive. So are you," she said softly. "I wasn't sure either of us would be." He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing the edge of the locket. "She loved him then," he murmured. "Your mother, my father, and they died for it." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "And now we stand where they once stood." Evelina nodded. "And we can choose differently." For a moment they simply looked at one another, two souls bound by the sins of those who came before. Then Rowan drew her into his arms. The world outside the ruins fell away. There was only the heartbeat beneath her ear, the scent of rain and smoke, and something like forgiveness. "The weight of blood is heavy," he whispered, "but not heavier than love." Evelina closed her eyes. "Then let it end here, Rowan, with us." And beneath the silver gaze of the moon, amid the ghosts of two fallen houses, their lips met, not in fury, but in peace. Chapter 6. The Night of Reckoning. The full moon waned above the ruins of Ashbourne, veiled by rolling clouds that whispered of rain. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and something older, the scent of endings. Evelina stood by the window of her father's crumbling chamber, looking out over the valley where the fires of war had once burned. The manor creaked with every gust of wind, as though remembering its own ghosts. Below, the courtyard was quiet. The soldiers were gone, the banners torn. Only one torch still burned, the one Rowan had lit hours ago beside the great hall, where they'd spoken words of peace. Neither fully trusted, but both longed to believe. She pressed a hand to her breast, where his ring, a soldier's signet he had left behind, hung from a thread. She could still feel the warmth of his hand when he'd placed it there, the warmth of the man who should have been her sworn enemy, the man she could no longer imagine her life without. Behind her, her father stirred in his sickbed. Lord Cedric's voice was little more than a rasp now, his body fading, though his eyes still burned with the embers of his pride. "He's come here," he croaked, "the son of Thorn. You think I don't know?" Evelina turned slowly. "He came because I asked him to." Cedric's laugh was dry and bitter. "To gloat, no doubt, to watch me die." "He came to end this war, father," she said quietly, "to bury what should never have begun." "Bury?" His voice rose, ragged. "You think peace can be buried? You think love can mend blood spilled over 2 generations? Evelina took a step closer. "It can, because our mothers and fathers destroyed this land in the name of vengeance. Rowan and I won't." He stared at her for a long moment, and then his face twisted into something between pain and fury. "He's fooled you." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I've seen his truth. I know now what you did, how you lied about Mother, how you blamed the Thorns for what your own jealousy caused." For a heartbeat silence. Then, slowly, Cedric smiled. "So, you finally found out." Evelina froze. You admit it?" He coughed, blood staining his lips. "Your mother betrayed me. She planned to flee with Thorn. I caught them. She begged me to let her go, said she loved him, so I made sure she'd never leave again." The words landed like blades. "You killed her," Evelina whispered, voice trembling. "You killed your own wife. She killed my pride," he hissed. "And pride, my dear, is a man's soul." Evelina felt the ground tilt beneath her. The firelight danced across his face, the face she had once called father, and all she could see now was a ruin, built of hate. I pitied you, she said, voice breaking. I thought vengeance had twisted you, but it was pride all along. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. And now you'll betray me for the son of the man she loved. Poetic, isn't it? I'm not betraying you, she said softly. I'm freeing myself. Down in the great hall, Rowan Thorn waited. The torches cast long shadows along the broken pillars. He stood with his sword sheathed, cloak thrown aside, the silver light of the moon painting his face in cold relief. The man who had once been commander of 1,000 soldiers now looked like a soldier haunted by one heart. He heard footsteps. Evelina descended the stairs, the flickering light tracing the sorrow in her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rowan said quietly, "Your letter said we would end this war tonight." She nodded. "We will." But before she could speak again, a sound echoed through the hall, the creak of steel, the shuffle of boots. Rowan's hand went to his sword. From the shadows behind the columns, 6 armed men emerged. Ashbourne soldiers, their armor dented and worn, but their purpose clear. At their head was Captain Varron, her father's last loyal hound. "So it's true," Varron sneered. "The lady and the wolf." Evelina stepped forward, alarmed. "Varron, stand down. The war is over." "Not for me," the captain spat. "Not for Lord Cedric. He ordered this himself. The last command of a dying man. The Thorn's blood ends tonight." Rowan's eyes flicked toward Evelina. "He's here?" Her throat tightened. "He's too weak to stand, not too weak to hate." Rowan muttered. The captain raised his blade. "On your knees, Thorn." Rowan drew his sword, its steel whispering through the air. "You'll have to put me there." "Stop!" Evelina cried, moving between them. "Enough death. This isn't what my mother would have wanted." But the soldiers closed in. The moment fractured, motion, light, sound, blending into chaos. The first blow struck. Rowan parried, sparks scattering across the stones. Another came from behind. He turned, deflecting it. Varron lunged. Rowan caught the blade and twisted, sending the man sprawling. "Evelina, get back!" Rowan shouted, but she didn't move. Her father's soldiers hesitated, unwilling to harm her, yet unwilling to disobey. The hall filled with the ring of steel, the thunder of boots, the hiss of breath. Rowan fought like a man born of war, each strike precise, brutal, desperate. The scent of blood mingled with smoke from the torches, and above it all, Lord Cedric's voice echoed faintly from the balcony, trembling and furious. "Kill him! End it! For Ashbourne!" Rowan looked up just as the old lord raised a small crossbow, trembling in his frail hands. "Father!" Evelina screamed. "No!" But the bolt flew and struck her. She staggered, eyes wide, hand clutching her side as crimson bloomed against her gown. "Evelina!" Rowan's roar shattered the hall. He caught her before she fell, the sword slipping from his hand. Her blood was warm against his skin. Above them, Cedric swayed on the balcony, horror dawning in his eyes. "No, no, that wasn't meant for you." Rowan looked up, face white with fury. "You've taken everything from both of us." Before he could move, Cedric stumbled backward. The railing cracked. The Lord of Ashbourne fell, his body striking the stone floor below with a dull, final thud. The hall went silent. The remaining soldiers lowered their blades, faces pale with shock. The man they had followed for decades now lay broken before them. Their cause, their hatred, their loyalty, all of it died with him. Rowan held Evelina in his arms as the last of the moonlight slipped through the shattered roof. "Stay with me," he murmured. "You hear me, Evelina? Stay. Her lips curved faintly. You always were terrible at taking orders. Don't you dare joke now. She reached up weakly, brushing his cheek. It's over, isn't it? Yes, he whispered. It's over. Then don't cry for me, Rowan. Cry for what we've lost. I can't lose you, he said, voice breaking. Not after everything. You won't, she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. Love doesn't die. It just changes its form. Her eyes fluttered closed. For a heartbeat there was nothing but the sound of the wind, the faint crackle of torches, the hush of her final breath. Rowan pressed his forehead to hers, the salt of tears mingling with the scent of smoke, and then a faint cough. He looked down. Her chest moved, shallow but moving, her pulse faint but there. Rowan shouted for aid. The soldiers, stunned moments ago, rushed forward. Get water! Call the physician! Now! They obeyed, not because he was Thorn, but because they saw in his eyes something greater than command. Devotion. Dawn came slowly to Ashbourne. The fires were out, the banners torn down, the dead buried by friend and foe alike. Evelina lay in her mother's old chamber, pale but alive. The wound had missed her heart by an inch. The physician said she would live, though she would bear the scar always. Rowan sat beside her bed, his armor cast aside, his sword resting against the wall. His hand never left hers. When she finally stirred, her eyes opened to the light of morning. You stayed, she murmured. He smiled faintly. I told you I was terrible at taking orders. A weak laugh escaped her lips. Then promise me one thing. Anything. Promise me this will end with us. No more blood. No more vengeance. He leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her brow. I swear it, on my name, and on the love I should have never found. Evelina closed her eyes again, a peaceful smile curving her lips. Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the ruined banners, turning them from crimson to gold. The war was over, and though the kingdom would remember the ashes, it would also remember what rose from them. Two hearts that had defied the past and rewritten its end. Chapter 7. The Only Woman I Can't Forget. The snows came early that year. By the time the first frost blanketed the valley, the war that had defined a generation had faded into memory. The land was quiet once more, scarred but healing. The castle at Thorn Keep stood taller than ever. Smoke curled from its chimneys again, not from siege fires but from hearths warming families that had returned home. For the first time in years, laughter echoed in the courtyard. But within its stone halls, Commander Rowan Thorn felt none of that peace. He stood before the great window in his chamber, staring out at the pale light that touched the horizon. The snow fell in slow, drifting silence. His reflection in the glass looked older, not in years, but in something heavier. His hair was longer, his beard rougher. The lines around his eyes told stories no medals ever could. It had been 6 months since Ashbourne fell, 6 months since Evelina's wound, 6 months since he had carried her from the ruins of her father's keep, wrapped in his cloak, her blood staining the fabric he still couldn't bring himself to wash. She had lived, but when she awoke, days later, weak but alive, she had made a request he hadn't expected. You must let me go. Those words had haunted him more than any battlefield. He had tried to refuse, of course, tried to argue, to plead, but she'd met him with that same quiet fire he had fallen in love with, a strength forged through loss. This land will never heal if it sees the daughter of Ashbourne in the arms of the thorn who conquered it. She had whispered, "Let them believe I'm gone. Let peace grow from the ashes of our names." He had known she was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. So when the spring thaw came, he had watched her ride away toward the southern valleys, toward a new name, a new life, her cloak fluttering like a ghost through the mist. That was the last he'd seen of her. Now, as the snow whispered against the window, Rowan heard a knock at the door. "Enter," he said softly. A servant stepped in, bowing low. "My lord, a messenger has arrived from the southern border. He carries a letter, sealed in blue wax." Rowan's heart stilled. Blue wax, Evelina's color. "Bring it here," he said. The servant handed him the parchment and withdrew. Rowan's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The scent of lavender rose faintly, that same fragrance that had haunted his dreams. He unfolded the letter. "To Rowan Thorn, if this reaches you, know that I am well. The village of Merin is kind to strangers, and the children here have learned to laugh again. I've taken my mother's name, Evelina Hart. It feels strange on my tongue, but perhaps every new beginning must first taste of strangeness. You asked me once if I regretted it all. The answer is still no, even the pain, even the loss, because it led me to the only man who ever looked at me and saw not the daughter of an enemy, but the woman I could have been. The kingdom whispers that peace is holding. That's what we wanted, isn't it? I like to believe your promise carried more weight than any oath sworn in blood. If you ever ride south, there is an old chapel on the edge of the forest. Its bell tower still stands. I go there every morning to light a candle, one for the dead and one for the living. Perhaps one day you'll find the same light and follow it home." He read it again and again until the words blurred into tears he no longer tried to hide. Outside, the snow fell harder, wrapping the world in white silence. Rowan closed the letter, tucking it over his heart, then reached for his cloak. The ride south was long and cold. He passed through villages where people bowed as he rode by. Not out of fear, but respect. The war hero, the man who ended it. But he barely saw them. All he saw was her face in his memory. Her eyes like morning after a storm. Her voice soft but unyielding. Her hand in his as the world around them burned. By dusk on the fourth day, he reached the valley she had written of. Snow dusted the trees, and the faint sound of a bell echoed through the forest. Slow, steady, eternal, he followed it. Through the mist, the chapel came into view. Old stone, half-collapsed roof, but still standing. Candles flickered in the windows, and there, by the doorway, wrapped in a grey shawl, stood Evelina. For a long time, neither moved. She looked different, her hair longer, her gown simple, her face touched by sunlight and wind. But her eyes were exactly the same. When he dismounted, she stepped forward. "You found the light?" she said softly. He couldn't speak. His throat closed around everything he wanted to say, every apology, every memory, every heartbeat he'd saved for this moment. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. "I told you I'd never forget," he whispered. Her eyes glistened. "And I told you, love never dies, it only changes." He laughed through the ache in his chest. "Then let it change again, from war to peace, from memory to life." Evelina smiled faintly. "Then stay." He pulled her into his arms, the snow falling around them in silence, like the world itself was holding its breath. Her warmth seeped through the cold, her heartbeat steady against his chest. "You're my enemy's daughter," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, and the only woman I can't forget. Then don't, she whispered. Remember me, not as your enemy, but as your home. They kissed, slow, tender, unhurried, the kind of kiss that rewrites a lifetime of pain. Outside, the bell tolled once more, its echo carrying through the valley like a benediction. Years later, travelers who passed through Merin would sometimes speak of a small chapel by the forest, where a soldier and a woman tended the candles each morning. No one knew their names, but the villagers said that when the light caught them just right, you could see how they looked at each other, as though the war had never been, as though the world itself had begun again, and perhaps in a way it had.